Well, if you have any doubt about the durability of these markets and whether they could be sustained, they're almost always punctuated, at least in the beginning, by a surge in housing-related activity, the stocks down the road. That happened after 9/11. That happened after the financial meltdown. Took a while. But this is why some people are seizing on data like new home mortgage applications that are at close to an 11-year high, actually a more than 11-year high, permits and home construction, future activity that seems to show that could be the wind at the industry's back, and maybe the overall economy is back. Scott Martin looks at this kind of data very, very closely. Scott, that tends to lead the way, doesn't it?
It does. Neil, homes in our, say, personal balance sheets, as far as the value, is typically the biggest item on our personal balance sheets these days. So, yes, they're very, very important to ourselves personally and certainly to the economy. But I hate to kind of spike or dump out the party punch here on the numbers today. But at Kingsview, we're worried about the housing market, Neil, and not so much that it's going to crash or just say burn up. But the reality is that there's going to be some leveling off here from, I think, this recent bounce we've seen. And it almost becomes maybe more of a, I guess, a word that could describe it as a trifurcated market, in my opinion, which means that there's going to be a lot of differences in three areas. One is certainly going to be in location, say urban versus rural. Also is going to be in price. Maybe homes that are in that cheaper range, below that median home price of, say, $226,000 nationwide, might sell better than the higher end homes. And then certainly with respect to how they're constructed, either the single family nature of construction that they have versus a multifamily or condo might be separated as well. So you have a bumpy market, I think, going forward here as the economy continues to recover.
You know, the spikes in cases you hear about, no governor that I know of, maybe with the exception of Oregon and Utah, where they're considering it, is delaying phases, reopening phases as a result of those spikes. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the interesting things, too, is, being in Chicago and back in Chicago recently after leaving for a good month and a half and spending some time in very lovely and comforting Ohio, shows me, though, and just getting back here and talking to some folks, talking to some clients of ours, shows me how some of this big city living is starting to get a little stale for some folks. And certainly to your point about what certain states have done as to how they've done these reopenings is starting to sour people's opinions of some of the machinations that have gone on. So in my opinion, that's another thing, too, that if you just look going forward, Neil, and just think about it personally, if you're unsure if you're going to stay in a particular city or state, or you're unsure about your job going forward, because our research still suggests we're going to lose several million jobs out of this recession, one way or another, whether you like it or not, no matter what the Fed does, no matter what the Treasury Department does, there is a lot of uncertainty out there with respect to the mortgage market, in our opinion, that even as a bank, if you are going to lend to somebody that's all of a sudden wanting to buy a new home, if they're not so certain they have a job, say, come the fall, if they don't have a job right now, does that dollar or does those dollars get lent?
Yeah, then you have to wonder about whether it's a self-fulfilling prophecy for cities like New York, for example. It slowly reopens, but a lot of people might not come back, not because their bosses aren't telling them to, but because they don't want to. And that obviously leads to, mayors across the country looking at ways to make up for that by raising taxes to address a declining tax base. It could feed on itself, couldn't it?
Self-fulfilling prophecy at work, my friend. I mean, I'll tell you, in Chicago, I'm afraid of that. I mean, they've already talked about some of the things that they need to cover, which we already had to cover when we didn't have COVID going on and didn't have the protesting and things. I mean, my goodness, if you look at some of the coverage that Neil, these mayors and the governors, Governor Pritzker here in Illinois, that needs to cover with respect to the budget shortfalls we already had. My goodness, going forward, there's going to be a lot of tax burden on the folks that are left and the businesses that are still operating here.
All right. Thank you, my friend, very much. Scott Martin, Kingsview Asset Management, Fox News contributor as well, with us right now.